Okay, we're going to spend a second day on these box and whisker plots because we did have some people absent yesterday for different reasons. So it will be helpful for those of you who were here to review and helpful for the others to just learn it. Now, like I was saying, we're looking at data, and the data is the total number of points scored in each of the Rose Bowls from 1970 until 2006. So you have 4 decades, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. That's why you'll see that you have 4 number lines. We're going to do a box and whisker plot for each of the decades. Now, to create a box and whisker plot, what do you have to find? What did we call it yesterday? The 5-number summary. Okay, anytime you're wanting to construct a box and whisker plot, you first have to find the 5-number summary. Now, what does this 5-number summary consist of? Right, the minimum and maximum, and quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3. Now let's talk a little more about those. The minimum is the lowest number in the data set. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as the lower extreme. The maximum is the highest number in the data set, and it's sometimes referred to as the upper extreme. The quartiles are all medians. You always want to start by finding quartile 2 because it's the median of all the data. It will split the data in half, into a lower half and an upper half. The Q1 is the median of the lower half. Q3 is the median of the upper half. Okay, so if we first want to focus on the 70s and do a box and whisker plot for the 70s, I need to create the 5-number summary for the 70s. Well, what do you need to do first if you're going to be finding medians? Well, we can find the min and max first, but then we definitely need to put them in order. Okay, so what is the minimum for the 70s decade? 13. What was the maximum? 63. But to find our 3 quartiles, you first have to put the numbers in order from least to greatest. Now there's not a whole lot of room on this paper, so I'm going to do that on scratch paper. Okay, so for the 70s, what was the lowest score in the 70s?
13.
Okay, next lowest? 33. Okay, and then in a decade, there's how many years? 10. So let's make sure we have all of our data. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, we already found the min and the max, so we just need to worry about the quartiles. Which one do we need to find first? The second one. You always want to find your median of all the data so you can split it into a lower half and an upper half. Now, if you have 10 data items, is there going to be a number exactly in the middle? No, you're going to have 2 numbers that split the middle. And what 2 numbers would that be in this scenario?
33.
Okay, how do you find a median when you have 2 middle numbers? Right, you average them. Add them up and divide by 2 because there's 2 middle numbers. So what is the average of 33 and 35? Right? So that's our Q2. Now what we've done is we've split the data into a lower half and an upper half. So what is the middle number in the lower half? 25. So that's your quartile 1. And what is your median of your upper half? So that's your quartile 3. Okay, so now let's go back and write those down. What was the Q1? Q2 and Q3. Now we have the 5-number summary for the 70s, so we're ready to do our box and whiskers plot. Now, they do say make sure all 4 of your graphs are drawn with the same scale so that when we compare them, it's easier to compare. So, the lowest score is 13, I believe. The highest score is over here in the 2000s, 79. So I'm going to go from 10 to 80 by 5s. But since it'll get a little crowded, I'm not going to number like the 15 and the 25. I'm just going to number 10, 20, 30, just so it's not so crowded. Okay, now that you have your number line ready, how do we label the minimum of 13? A dot. Okay, your min and max, if that's 10, that's 15, so 13 would be about right here. And then the max is 63, so that would be about right here. Now how do we label the quartiles? A line. So 25 is our quartile 1, so that would be right here. 34 is quartile 2. And 47 is quartile 3. Then you create a box with those 3 lines. Then you connect the box to the dots, and those make your whiskers. And let me fix that one. Okay, so there's your box and whiskers plot for the 70s. Okay, now let's go and do the 80s. Okay, what was the minimum point scored in the 80s? 28 was the lowest?
Yeah.
Okay. What was the maximum? Guys, what's the maximum score in the 80s? Okay, and to find the quartiles, we're going to need to list out the numbers from least to greatest. So I'm going to do that on a separate paper. Chase, will you hop up and close the door, please? Okay, what was the lowest score in the 70s? I mean the 80s, my bad, 80s. 28, okay, then the next one. Okay. There's no numbers between those? Okay, so let's check and make sure we have 10 data items. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, when you're doing the quartiles, which one should you start with? The second one, because that's the median of all the data. Well, with 10 items, are you going to have an exact middle? No. 2 numbers split the middle. What 2 numbers split the middle?
37.
Right. What's the average of 37 and 37? 37. Now, we've created a lower half and an upper half. What is the median of the lower half? 33. So that's your quartile 1. What's the median of your upper half? 38. So that's your quartile 3. Okay, 38. Okay, remember they asked us, since we'll be comparing these box and whisker plots, to use the same scale. So make sure you number your number line the same. Okay, and now that I have everything I need, I'm ready to construct my box and whisker plot. So where does my first point go? 28, because that's my minimum. So about right there is where my minimum is. Then my maximum is way over here at 73. My first line is at 33. My second one's at 37. And my third one's at 38. So this is a very small box. And why is that? Right. Most of the scores were very close together with the exception of this outlier over here. This is an outlier because it's far away from the rest of the data. Okay, now what I want you to do is take a few minutes and you're going to do the 90s and the 2000s on your own. With the lesson. Okay, so what did you get for the minimum of the 90s? 27. The maximum? Quartile 1, quartile 2, and quartile 3. Okay, so let's graph this box and whisker plot, or construct it. 27 is our minimum, 73 is our maximum. Quartile 1 is right about here. Quartile 2 is about here. Quartile 3, very close to the maximum. So which way is this data skewed? I mean, left. The longer whiskers on the left. I mean, yeah, and it's not terribly skewed to the left, but if you had to pick one or the other, it would be skewed left. Did we go over a while ago what you call when there's really no skewed at all? Normal distribution. Normal distribution. Okay, I did a lot of that yesterday. Okay, so now let's do the 2000s. What is the min? 26. Max? Quartile 1? Quartile 2? And quartile 3? Okay. So min 26, that's about right there. Max 79. 45. 50.5. And 66.5. Sorry. Okay, this one's a little bit skewed left, but really not much. You could really call that normal distribution as well. No, the longer side's to the left. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to leave these on the board, but on the next page we're going to answer some questions comparing them. 28 says on the next page, in which decade is the total points scored the most consistent? The 80s. Look at the 80s. They were most consistent in the 80s. There's not a lot of, the box and whisker graph is not varied in the 80s. It's very small. Okay, so that answer is 80s. 29, in which decade is the total points scored the most diverse? The 90s. You have the most spread in the 90s. Wrong way. In which decade is the largest number of total points scored? The 2000s, right. Because we had a score of 79. That was the largest. I write out 2000s. Okay, in which decade is the third quartile the highest? The 90s. Barely, because quartile 3 is 69. This quartile 3 is very close, but not quite, so that would be the 90s as well. 32, in which decade is the median the highest? The 90s. Okay, quartile 2 in the 90s was 53. It was 50.5 in the 2000s, so close, but not quite as high as the 90s. Yes, well, I was born in the 80s. In which decade is the first quartile the highest? The first quartile is 2000s. Okay, it was 45. That's your highest Q1. In which decade is the outlier the most dramatic? Definitely the 80s. This score over here, 73, is way far away from the data. That's skewed right. Okay, so we could put the 80s because the data was skewed right. And it was skewed right because it had an outlier. And what was the outlier? What value? Okay, here we go. What is the general trend that your 4 box and whisker graphs reveal? Really, this could be a lot of different answers. Just what are some things you notice?
It gets further right.
Okay, so as the decades go on, the point scores increase, right? So as the decades increase, the points scored also increases. Okay, and there are lots of answers you could come up with this, they're just basically asking you to compare them, talk about things that you see. Okay, now this is your classwork, and you have plenty of time to finish it, so it should definitely not turn into homework. Come up with 2 data sets. Okay, so we're going to have 2 different data sets here. And each of those data sets has to have 5 elements, so 5 numbers. Well, not completely random. They can be any numbers you choose. However, they have to have a median of 9 and a mean of 9. Okay, so your 2 different data sets both have to have a median of 9, which is simple. I mean, what does that mean? They both have to have 9 as their middle number. Right, and they also have to have a mean of 9. Now, the thing is, they want you to do the box and whisker plot, and they want them to be dramatically different. So you need to think of 2 totally different sets that meet the criteria of a mean of 9 and a median of 9. I know this requires you to think a little outside the box, but I'm very confident you can do it.